All right, let's take it from you.
Fine.
Okay. Susan MINOT is the author of 5 novels, now 2 short story collections, a book of poems. She's a playwright, a painter. The play On Island and the book Monkeys both featured North Haven as a setting. Susan has demonstrated a keen insight into family dynamics, modern love, and the quest for being true to oneself. Her new collection features writings from the past 30 years. The ironic title is Why I Don't Write. And Susan's going to read a couple of selections from the collection of short stories.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for having me here in your beautiful house over the water. This is very unusual to have a Zoom chat where you actually get to be next to the person, so that's really nice. Yeah, so there are 10 stories in the book, and as David said, they were written over about 30 years. So I didn't have a plan for this collection. 4 of the stories were written in the 90s, and they were published then, but never collected in the book. And then as I was working on a novel that I've been working on for a long time, I would start to sort of write little stories just to finish something and feel that I'd accomplished something. And then I realized I had a certain amount of stories and took some from the 90s, and that's how this collection got sort of cobbled together. Some of the stories are quite different, so I thought I'd just read very little short sections of 3 of them. So this is from the first story, which is called Pole Pole. It's a Kenyan expression which means sort of take it slow, or shame, like if you fell and hurt your knee, you'd say pole pole, shame, and slow down probably if you hurt your knee. And it takes place in Kenya. This is sort of near the end of the story, and a documentary filmmaker, American, named Daisy, has just had a kind of one-night stand with a sort of dashing journalist that she meets, and she finds out sort of after she spent the night that he's actually married and his family is elsewhere. So she's feeling a little less enthusiastic than she was at first. And so while she's waiting in the morning for him to take her home, Daisy stood waiting next to the Jeep in the driveway. Through the front window of the cottage, she could see the man on the telephone with his back to her, facing the wall, talking to the wife, she figured. It was bright outside, and she was without sunglasses. She strolled off to be out of sight of the man, scuffing the ground. Many footprints had distressed the dirt. Suddenly, she felt exhausted. For a moment, she was back in the bed with the man. He was holding her wrist. She felt swept up again, and it ran through her body. Sex was like that. Not all of you came back right away. Part of you lingered with the person, not unhappily. It was nice to be relieved of yourself, though eventually that part would return. She had moved into the shade near Edmund's house. Edmund is one of his staff, and he has a wife named Cecily who live in this house. The one door was open to a turquoise painted wall. There was thin grass in the front yard and a small circle of charred wood. Against the ochre wash of the house sat 2 white molded plastic chairs. A small child appeared in the doorway wearing a pink sleeveless dress with ruffles at the shoulders and eating a papaya. She eyed Daisy. Daisy smiled and said, "Habari." The girl's eyes widened, and she looked behind her for instruction, then stared again at Daisy. Cecily appeared behind the little girl, carrying something, shooing her out the door. Her arms were straining under the weight of a large gray tub. The little girl sat on a log near the burnt area, biting the papaya, still watching Daisy. Cecily hauled the tub to the end of the yard near some scarlet hibiscus and tossed the water out. It floated in the air like a mirror, then came down flat and made a circle of puff in the dirt. Cecily turned around and looked at her, a white woman standing on the tan drive in her tan skirt. Daisy waved and smiled and started to step back. She rocked on her sandals. Cecily came forward a few steps and stopped. Her smooth, solid face was not smiling. At first, Daisy thought she was getting some version of the cold stare, the look of disapproval any girl might get stumbling out of the man's cottage, possibly one in a series of aimless white girls. But when Cecily lifted her hand to shield her eyes from the sun, Daisy saw a different expression. She was looking at Daisy with pity.
Wonderful. So it's interesting that this first story in this collection takes off from your last novel. And the last story in this collection refers to a character or is about a character in your first novel, Monkeys. And this span of your career is a writing life. And yet the ironic title, Why I Don't Write, is the kind of hinge in the middle of the book. And the collection, I think, revolves around it. And yet it's not exactly a short story. It's more poetry or more a collection of overheard phrases that you've collected and you've bundled together in this most poetic way that explains why you can't write in a way. And we had talked before about the idea that you say at the end that another story will come. And that's, I think, true of any art, is that the blank page that a writer deals with, the blank canvas that a painter deals with, the bars of lines to be filled in with musical notes, it's always a quest to find that next creative spark.
Yeah, or maybe even not finding it, it will come to you.
Yes.
In a way, like these things that sort of drift by through your mind and from outside, from inside, that are distracting if you're trying to paint a painting or write a story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to believe that it's going to come, because some days it feels like it might not. And I think that's what that particular story describes, those distractions and those voices in your head and external voices that kind of prevent you from doing it. But then something comes out of it. You still can make something by persevering. And
by persevering, and I think also in let me read just the end of that story,
that would be great.
So you can get kind of an idea. So it's really is just like, I sort of think of it like sort of dandelion seeds kind of drifting through the air. It's often the way my mind feels when it's not a dark cave that's deep in shadow. And following each of these drifts, it's taking you away from the work that you're doing. And I think this is particularly true of our moment in history right now with there's so many things, little bits and pieces of things that can be intriguing that come at us, many bits and pieces of things that are so disturbing. And you hear a disturbing thing and you don't feel like trying to make something, it kind of buckles you at the knees. So, but finally, I think that's a subject right there, right? How to sort of carry on and keep finding things and make something of those things. And so this just sort of is kind of the list of things going through the writer's mind. The cool air at night, like this sort of stops you from writing. Lucky to be alive, a miracle to be alive. You write if you would die. In the morning, passing a man and a woman, kissing each other goodbye, leaning onto each other, drawing strength for the day. Beethoven getting loud, Beethoven getting soft. Wetting a watercolor cube, touching the paintbrush to stiff paper. Tolstoy, with extra whipped cream, please. Women writers without children, many. Women writers with children, few. Use of the drug was up 33% in the last 6 months. Can't you take a joke? My friend says, vibrationally, I think it's easier to move forward if we stick to the truth. No need to make anything up. The world will up you. You can get those removed, you know. It's not that expensive. The lights go down, the curtain opens, the comets streak. He didn't get back to me. Spinach, maple syrup, oranges, apples, milk. While dying, he took no painkillers. Tree branches flashing by the car window, the beauty. Need new socks, new underwear, tomorrow. Of the billions of creatures alive today and of the billions of creatures who have lived, not one has come up with an adequate explanation of why we are here. I watch my daughter dance with a frown on her face and a warm feeling washes across my chest. Dust haloing the lampshade. On her deathbed, she said in a shaky voice, "We had a good time, didn't we? The pipes are shot, need to be redone. Another story will come. See above."
Wonderful. I love the way, you know, you've really blurred the line between a short story and poetry. And you do that twice in this collection. Listen is another one, which seems more political and seems kind of louder in a way. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. But it brings me back to
louder because no one's listening to each other.
But what I liked about the story Occupied was that seems very prescient too. And in the now, it's describing the Occupy City Hall, but it could be Black Lives Matter. It's definitely a story for an age of protest, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. as a background to people's lives, which is how we all experience this, really, unless we're, you know, right in the middle of it.
Right. Unless you can give up your life and join the encampment downtown.
Which many people mm-hmm. do, and they're touched upon in the story. But then you kind of double back to 9/11 too in the opening of that story. But I liked how that, and this is something you seem to do very well, interweaves with a love story, with a passionate love story. And I love your description and your sense of how people are attracted to one another. I think you do that particularly well. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of places in this collection. There's one in particular in the story Occupied, which mm-hmm. could be preoccupied mm-hmm. by this woman.
Her brain is certainly occupied with this man, right even here. As she's,
And you don't know that this is what I picked.
Okay. So this is a single mother in New York City. She's an artist, and she, on her way home from her studio, she thinks, I just should go see that it's occupied. It's been there for a month, and in her kind of youth, she would have been protesting, but now she has an 8-year-old boy at home, and the babysitter has to leave at 5. So she decides to stop and just see what's going on there. But she's also absolutely occupied with a sort of love affair with a journalist who, not the same journalist in Pole Pole, a different journalist who isn't really giving her the time of day, even though they're carrying on. And so right down here, so she's talking about when a man sort of appears, and his name is Dexter Fleming. Then in crashed Dexter Fleming. He intended in no way to crash. He had just appeared, interested. As far as he was concerned, she was yet another girl who, when he gestured with his hand to come a little closer to him on the couch, sidled obediently over to his firm, round shoulder, where the surprise of him being close turned out to be so massive, Ivy could barely breathe. He had no intention of making an impression. He had no intention at all.
I just think that's so sharp. You know, first the crash, but then you know it's not going to end well. You know the crash is not just cataclysmic in the beginning. It's going to end in tears.
There are a lot of crashes.
There are lots of
stories.
crashes.
There's some other ones.
But I loved that story, and I loved how.
Well, I'm glad you like that story, David, because this is an outtake of the novel that I am working on now. So there's a lot more of Ivy and her crashes and preoccupations.
So when you say an outtake, I mean, you've done some film work. Do you sometimes think about these things cinematically?
I do not.
Yeah.
I think of it very much as sentences, because that's what fiction is. Film is, you know, you use words to describe what the film's going to be, but this is only words. So I stick with the words. And no, don't think. In fact, this seems to be, it's not so much a choice as it just seems where I get, you know, dragged by the tide, that I more and more want to examine what's going on in someone's mind. So, you know, that's what Evening was. Yeah. There's a woman lying on her deathbed, and most of the, you know, some people come visit her, but most of the story actually, and that's not North, I mean, that's the island that she returns to is very much based on North Haven. Yeah. And when she went to a wedding, and so it's what's going on in her mind, this revisiting of a memory. And so that's hard to do in film. I mean, people do flashbacks in film, but film can't capture that sort of, I mean, it captures a lot of things, but not so much the juxtaposition of, you know, walking around an encampment and what's going on in her mind, like at the same time, you know.
And you're very clear about writing, and the fact that you write in longhand and you don't use a computer and you don't use technology, you actually refer to that in one, I can't remember if it's Listen or Why I Don't Write, to ink on a page. And just knowing that you write in longhand, it's that sense of kind of personal touch, I think, is through a lot of these stories. You're not a kind of technological writer. If you, I mean,
definitely am not.
You're
That's very true.
You're, you know, it's about craft in making something, and the fact that it's pen on paper seems to be very much a part of that.
Well, that's what it is initially. I have graduated to doing the last drafts on the computer, but my last book was the first one I did that with.
I was going to talk a little bit about the relationship to Summer, which was the show we did, 3 years ago?
We have one audience member here.
We have a live person.
That was our director,
a collaborator.
Lily Thorne.
And Summer was a collection of sort of overheard phrases and presented as a kind of prelude to the play you wrote on Island. And it was very different, and it was very much atmospheric and poetic, and it was presented in a kind of reader's forum. But this is something new for you to write this way, and now here it is in two of the collection here.
I paint watercolors, but I also do collages, which is sort of a little bit more in that same department of like finding a found thing and juxtaposing it with something else. The poet John Ashbery, who I don't always understand, but he's a poet who, even in my lack of understanding, I love. You know, he does that very much. I remember seeing some of his sales slips, and he just had written like a thing he had just heard, and then he kind of puts them all together. And it's not like you slapdash put them together, but it's kind of found object. It's like recycling what's you know, what you come across, and it's a way of I find processing what comes at me every day, because otherwise you have to block it out if you're concentrating on writing something. So I'm letting that, you know, so that will always keep coming. Yeah.
There are some examples of Susan's collages at the Hopkins Wharf Gallery. So if you care to see them, which I think some people are unaware that you do that, because you don't necessarily always put them out there. I haven't, I just wanted to say at this point that if people have questions, you can use the chat feature, which I have not, I think, turned on yet. So let me do that now, so that toward the end, you can possibly pose some questions. Would you like to read something else from?
Yeah. I'm going to read from, this is a story, it's called Cafe Mort. And it's about a waitress in a restaurant that serves only dead people. And everyone who works in the restaurant is there because they're mourning someone. There's kind of a qualifier who has them in there. So they're literally serving dead people. It's, you know, a little bit about how grief is, if you sort of can't get out of it. And so this is just a little section. The electrocuted woman who comes in occasionally tonight brings her little girl with her. The kid smashes a coffee cup and dumps all the sugar packets into her lap. Her mother doesn't notice a thing. When the daughter sweeps the menu rack off the table, it clatters to the floor and everyone ignores it, not wanting to embarrass the electrocuted woman for some reason. Some deaths receive extra reverence. Karen, one of the other waitresses, deals with it, picking it up and saying, "No problem, having more patience than all of us." Karen's little brother fell out of an apartment window when Karen was 5. She had dared him to touch a pigeon. Some things are harder to live with than others. Jerry seats a family of 3 at a center table. They want only dessert. For drinks, the parents order coffee and the little boy says, "I'd like a queen-sized tea," which makes them all laugh. They drowned in a sailing accident and everyone looks happy. They order morphine supremes with vanilla ice cream. The thing about going in an accident is that a person exits his life unaware of his departure. An old-timer might see departure on the horizon. Does it matter that much? And then a little later in the story, she runs into a woman who is with an ambulance and she's in a nightgown, and it's like, is she supposed to be there? Is she not quite dead? And she seems to feel like she doesn't belong here in the restaurant. And this woman holds my gaze, and I'm surprised to see her eyes clear as paperweights with tiny angles of light in the blue. I would have expected rheumatic, sick eyes. Someone looks you hard that way. It gives you agita, but in a good way. "Well, it's not forever," I say, grasping at straws. She has unnerved me. "Don't you believe it," she says. Her bony hand comes out and latches onto my arm. We're fused together for a moment, and I feel oddly calm. Out of nowhere, the laughing paramedic appears behind her and takes her firmly by her shoulder. The woman gets off the stool and goes where she is taken, but looks over her shoulder at me. "You don't belong here either," she says. People say things that have a physical effect. It must be particular to humans that words can do that. That woman's words hit me and reverberate like a tolling bell through my body.
So that seems to incorporate aspects of like magic realism, or is that a genre that you
It's a ghost
read?
story.
Or yes,
It's a ghost story with a lot of ghosts.
Yeah. So, but is that a genre that interests you, or is it
Magic realism?
ghost stories? I mean, gothic.
Love ghost stories. I don't believe in ghosts.
Yeah.
I would like to be convinced that there are ghosts. I'm always surprised that people are scared of ghosts. Like, they're see-through things. What can they do? So that sort of idea interests me. And I just hadn't tried writing something about it.
Yeah. So that's something you set out to do, say, a detective noir novel next? I mean,
I actually did I tell you that?
No, you didn't.
We were talking about. No, I have kind of. It's not
right.
detective. Yes, I told you, like a noir. Sort of missing persons kind of. Yeah.
We talked about the English female detectives.
Yes, that I've been reading a lot of.
Yeah.
So I would like to write one of those. I've got sort of the beginning of something that I want to switch into that mode. Yeah. Not Ivy, but another one.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got a lot of the why I don't write is actually does refer to a period when I didn't write very much, and I was kind of weary of writing. I didn't feel the same sort of drive. I didn't think I had anything particular to say that was so riveting, and that was like after my 6th book, I guess. And then I got married and had a child and moved to a small island in Maine in Penobscot Bay, and there was nothing around me that was encouraging me to write. And it definitely helps to get encouragement, to either, to even have someone say, you should keep doing that. I like that, But I think I wanted to take a break from it for a while. It wasn't so much a decision as just this instinct to not write for a while, be.
But was it frustrating? I mean, just the thought that
it was like a strange floating feeling that I didn't know how to relate to myself, but I was trying to be, at least in real life. I mean, I kept writing. I have a lot of journals, and I always write in my journals. But I didn't have sort of a project and wasn't thinking about, I wrote a lot of poetry. You can sort of not begin, not end. And it really was, when I started writing 30 Girls, which took me 7 years to write, partly because I kept writing a different book and I'd switch it. But also, I think I didn't quite have the same drive to do it. So I'm well acquainted with why I don't write as a phenomenon, even though, it's the title of a story that's written.
And then in order to create this collection, which again, I think I said before, it feels like a collection rather than collected stories.
I have to say, you've found a very nice pattern. That was absolutely not, it really was like, I've got these 5 stories now. I've got those 4. Oh, wait, I've got one more I can throw in. What order should we put them in? And in fact, even the order of the stories was changed at the last minute, right before it went into galleys. So it was, and I think you're right. I think there's an interesting development. I started with the location of my last book and ended up sort of further in the future with the location of my first book. And then there's a story in the middle that's the book I'm working on now. And
the shortest story in the collection seems to refer to evening.
Well, that's a 3-page version of what evening became.
So you distilled it, you think, or?
No, the other way around.
The other way,
I wrote
yeah.
that story and I thought,
I see,
maybe
I see.
do a little bit more with that.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on in her mind that
Right.
she's calling out for a man other
Right.
than her husband?
Right. Yeah.
That,
And then
evening.
it blew into evening. Yeah, fantastic.
Mhm.
Yeah. So different from Occupied in that sense. Then,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
they
no,
took
that
it
was
on.
the
What was
germ.
the germ of Occupied then?
It's about it's the novel that I'm working
Yeah,
on, which
yeah.
is about a single
The
mother
single
in New
mother.
York who has this love affair
Yeah.
that she can barely fit in with
Yeah.
her life as a
Yeah.
single mom, that kind of undoes her.
Yeah.
And that was what it was going to be first, the novella. That
Yeah.
was it. And I thought, I don't want to leave her undone. I
Yeah.
want to see how she
But I love
pieces herself together. So
I won't give anything away, but there is the crash. We talked about the crash before. There is a crash that happens to where she's head over heels,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
idea. She falls out of love head over heels.
Mm-hmm.
She falls in love by crashing,
Mm-hmm.
by the man crashing into it. It's a lovely.
Mm-hmm. If only she fell out of love at that moment.
Well, she
doesn't
obviously
in the book.
doesn't. So she ends up in hospital. We have a couple of questions. Is this a
Okay.
time, or do you want to read something else?
Sure. No, I think we.
Let's see. It's Isabel. What are your favorite, least favorite aspects of the lockdown? Is lockdown inspiring to create or more difficult? How, why, what do you do? Do you have favorite books? FYI, these are just questions if you need them to get people started. Well, thank you, Isabel.
You know, it's funny. I did a big Zoom class with all the, I teach at Stony Brook, and we're going back in the fall remotely. And we had a big meeting with, it was sort of just a catch up with a lot of the students, a lot of the faculty and some of the graduate students. And one after another, I'd say 80% of them were saying, I haven't written a thing. I can barely read. I'm just staring at the leaves outside. And I found the opposite. It's like the world quieted down out there. So all the things that I was being sort of drawn out to, I didn't have to go out to. So I had much more time to write. I think other writers have said this, that in a way, a lockdown is kind of what you do to yourself partially when you're working on something, or what you do to yourself totally when you're at the beginning of something or at the end of something. So I found that that just logistically very, very helpful. You know, you can't think about, in the same way that you have to not think about the horrible things going on in the world when you sit down to write, you can't let yourself get distracted by that. But as far as, you know, inspiring in terms of material, I think a really interesting thing is happening right now. Yeah. It's not just like, disaster, or let's get back to where we were before. No, it's a change is a coming. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at that side of it with sort of enthusiasm and fascination. Yeah.
If somebody had told me, you know, in the start of last winter, you can't go out, you can't see anyone, you can't travel, I would have said,
we didn't even imagine it. Like, this wasn't the way we thought the sort of stop was going to happen.
But I welcome the reset button being pressed and change coming, as you say.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to show you a poem I wrote about it, because I use that actual line.
So shall we invite some more questions, or would you like to read another passage? Do you have one more?
I'll read one more. I'll read one more at the
That'd be
end.
great.
This is a short one. And a lot of this book ends up being, I guess you live long enough and you have sort of more memories, you know, more, it's like more material back there behind you, to sort of sift through, or you've sifted through it a lot, and yet something new can still come, you know. I think, you know, desire, death, and memory end up, again, not sort of chosen, but those end up being the things that, or memory, time and memory sort of go in the same box together. So this is from the last story in the book, in which Sophie Vincent from Monkeys is a college student. She's studying writing, and she has a professor who's kind of a little creepy, and everyone says stay away from him, but she's inspired by him. And then he does something that is actually very creepy, and it unsettles her. So she's thinking back to this thing that happened 40 years before. You think you are done with an experience once it is over, and it is set into some version in a story, and there it will sit. But if you return to the experience many years later, because you are, say, urged by a movement in the culture to re-examine the treatment of women, an examination which seems to come every 50 years or so before it fades away again, you might discover new details waiting for you, unnoticed. What you do not know when you're young is that you may, as your life goes on, return to things that happened, and that the more you visit a thing, the more time you spend experiencing it, in reflection, in memory, so that an event which took, say, an hour in your life may afterward be recalled and visited by you 50 times over each time you remember it. Moments of happiness, such as the period one fell in love, may be remembered again and again, weeks worth if it was really a compelling thing to think about. And moments when one was shocked might similarly be preserved, not voluntarily, but exist as a freeze frame.
So how old is that story? Is that
So this is my most recent story.
recent story? Yeah, because it does seem
It's set in the 70s.
Yes.
But it's definitely looking back from now, this time when the culture is re-examining.
So it's just
sort of Me Too.
And the story is just after Monkeys.
So it would be,
Yeah.
Well, no, it would be inserted in Monkeys, because it's Sophie's mother has been killed in an accident 4 months before. It's an outtake, intake.
I maybe spoiled that word for you, right? The outtake.
No, the outtake. Yeah, but this is like a it's an outtake that wasn't written yet.
An outgrowth.
Yeah, but then it's back in there. In time.
But it sums the moment up too. Like I'm sure that's so true of lots of people having these memories that maybe made them uncomfortable at the time, but thinking back, there was a sort of horrible abuse that took place within it. Just as in the other story, how badly affected the boy was in the story Twilight on Boston Common.
Boston Common at Twilight actually was a child Hassan
painting. Yes, a wonderful painting.
Yeah,
and it's such a gentle family sort of painting of almost a Christmassy scene, and it's a very sad story. It's the saddest story in the collection. You say.
It's very sad.
But it's very true too. I mean, it's
some people just can't manage
life. And what happens.
We want at the end of a story to figure out how's the person going to manage.
And we want happy endings, and we want things to work out. And just sometimes.
But I have to say, for me, in literature is a place that I've found a kind of solace in learning that a lot of things don't work out. Like, it's not like you've got to keep your chin up. It's like there you're allowed to sort of really say what's true, as hard as it is, and it makes it easier. It's paradoxical.
So I can't imagine you saw that painting and thought of that story.
No, I think I was writing the story,
Yeah.
and I had the Boston Common, I
Yeah.
think, was what
Yeah.
the title was, and then I realized, oh, it takes place at twilight,
Yeah.
and I sort of knew that
The
painting.
painting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it is a nice juxtaposition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
And it's absolutely what, except for the girl with her little
Yeah.
snowsuit on in the dress. It's that's how it
that's the
would have
scene.
looked.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever look at paintings and they would inspire a story? Like,
as we've sort of discussed, you never know
what's going to
inspire.
Yeah.
It's like things hit you, and Henry James said, "Be a writer on whom nothing is lost."
Yeah.
Like as what you want to say to your students. It's like, take the thing that hits you. That's what's going to make it your own voice, not the thing that you saw that hit that person, though you can, needless to say, learn, enormous amounts from how other people do it. And even, I think, gain a kind of bravery and confidence that, oh, they chose that thing, which is so off the wall, then I can choose that myself.
So Henry James as an influence. Who as a short story writer would you say was a?
Well, earliest was, Hemingway, probably.
Yeah.
I remember being most sort of like that gong hits, and you think, wow, this is wild what he's doing, and sort of inviting, and yet it's all about words, and, and there, I think Chekhov quickly became a constant go-to, and Chekhov's is sort of like that paragraph about memory. I loved him early on, but I didn't realize how so good he was, and I can keep going back to him. I remember reading Flannery O'Connor's stories first time around. They were amazing, just kind of tough and quite funny. And then John Cheever, when I was just graduated from school, they had a big collection, and I had never heard of him, and he's a real master of short story.
There was one in the collection that struck me that had the green glass, which we haven't talked about, but that seemed like a sort of modern romance, but it also struck me like Guy de Maupassant. It had the kind of gossipy, with a sting in the tail.
Right. Well, I like the sting in the tail.
Yeah. I guess that's true.
Or as a writer that I was just talking to recently said, the dismount, at the end of it. Yeah. And that's what's so delicious about stories. Yes. And that's why they're my, first and I think probably greatest love. You sort of take that breath, and just because of the shortness of it, you can be going along a certain way, and that last line can be the final thing you need to know, and it can make you suddenly look in a whole different direction.
You could probably make a poem out of your last lines in this collection.
That would be interesting.
Because they are very, they're a full stop.
Okay,
which
that'd
I
be
like.
Interesting, yeah.
So, shall we ask some questions? Let's see. Eugene Poole, have you found the issues in people's lives you want to write about have changed over the years? And if so, from what to what?
I think I'm kind of still myself. I'm writing in a different way now. I mean, I'm writing with more layers, I think. So, but I'm still interested in how, women think and how men behave, because I don't know how they think. So I'm fascinated in how they behave, and how people, just the subjectivity in people. And I think the more people I've known in my life, the more varied that becomes. So it hopefully is not expanding more, but it's going sort of deeper.
Yeah, I'd say definitely in this collection, the themes are set out and they've widened in many respects.
That's a relief to know that that works,
Yeah.
because I thought, am I losing my mind and going?
Has the mojo gone?
Yeah, if I just headed off into the ether.
Well, I would not say that based on this collection that was true.
Okay.
So everyone who's come, we've been at it for a while, and I think we've covered some ground. And it's been my great pleasure to sit here with Susan chatting. And I want to thank you all for coming. And shall I unmute you, or
we can say goodbye?
Or we could say goodbye.
Books are for sale at the bookshop.
Yeah,
I mean,
at the gift shop. And please support your local library. Next week, Taylor will be presenting from her book. We've been extremely lucky this year that we've had 4 island authors, 4 authors from North Haven, each with books out this year. That's pretty remarkable. And it's kind of sad that it's in this unusual year and we have to do it all by Zoom, but it's still something to be proud of that for such distinguished authors have gotten great books out, and it's been very fun talking to Susan today. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was
So
great.
great.
Love people.
Really well done. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Okay.
Hang up, Harold.
Do you, David? Hang up, Harold.
Yeah.
Hang up, Harold. So that was a famous phone call between. They're still going.
It sure was.
I have to say.
Be careful.